I knew if I'd shared about my depression earlier before the newsroom, on top of being a woman and in that very masculine field, and then you say, wow, I have depression. Normally, when you say, oh my God, I'm going on maternity leave, people are like, man, you took this thing about procreating and feeling the world too seriously. Such kind of comments. And it's not just comments. There are comments, and then it will also affect the kind of serious assignments that you are given.
Welcome to another episode of Her Media Diary, a podcast that captures the lived experiences of African women working in media industries. I am Dr. Yemisi Akimbobola, and today I'm joined by Verah Okeyo, a communications manager, journalism instructor, media trainer, and science journalist with over 10 years' experience in journalism. And in this episode, Verah shares her experience with mental health and how she developed coping mechanisms and a philosophy that guides her journalism practice. Verah, thank you so much for doing this interview. I think you and I have been friends for quite a while now. I want to say like 4 years or so that we've been friends. Yeah, around that. And and obviously in that time we've gotten to know each other quite well. I know a lot about your childhood and, this various episodes of your life, and you've shared some very intimate details about that with me. And in this podcast, I like to kind of go way back. And I'm sure you've listened to a few episodes. And I think it's really important, that context, because our histories often shape our future. That's part of the circle of life, right? So, V, I want to know, way back, V, early childhood. What's your first memories?
Wow, what's first memories? First of all, I'm a rural girl. I grew up in rural areas, and a huge chunk of my childhood was spent inside a national park, Hell's Gate National Park. The flower farm my father worked for, Shah Agencies. That time it was Shah Agencies. It used to be the largest fresh roses supplier in
Wow.
Naivasha. So anytime I remember my childhood, I remember nature. I remember being a very curious child and experimenting and all that.
Okay. So, but growing up, what was that like for you?
So that's what my childhood was, just like really exploring art, spirituality, a little of religion. Religion influenced my life because I learned most of my craft. I play some musical instruments. I love music, and I learned most of that in church because I loved to see, is there something beyond the now? Like, is there another dimension to the world we are living in right now? I don't say I believe in aliens, because every time people saying another dimension, they're like, oh my gosh, she's starting to lose it. So
No. No judgments. Yeah, I mean, we gotta, I guess part of life is questioning our existence, right? I think it'll be kind of arrogant for humans to assume that we're the only ones here. So I think it's a perfectly valid,
yeah.
approach to seeing the world,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. So, yeah, that was me. And I unfortunately have not left those tendencies. As far as I'm concerned, they have even intensified. But because of those things, my age mates would see me. What a weird child.
You've spoken about your dad a couple of times. Tell me more about him.
Oh, my father, the kind of person that he was, the kind of things I expect from people. Now that I'm an adult, I'm like, you know what, no man or no male person is ever going to be your father. So these days I've toned it down a little bit. My father was also like me. He loved art, and he was different because my mom was the ambitious, go-getter kind of person who was very rational. My father was very spiritual. He believed in karma. He believed in what you put out in the world will come back to you. And he taught me that. So my father encouraged me to be very curious because he wasn't a disciplinarian. Not that he was a pushover. He was that heavily built, tall looking man. Like he would the pictures I have of him and my mother, I used to look at him like, what an odd couple. Like, he was such a giant and she was so tiny. I cannot even read it. So my dad was like a gentle giant, and he loved martial arts. He loved music. He played the guitar. He was a community focused person, and of course also spiritual. Someone who always believed an explanation. Like, he believed in science. Like, his wife was a nurse, and those days my mother had a master's and in a village where women are not so educated. So my father believed in science, but also he believed there are other explanations for things, and that's kind of like how he influenced me to pursue other things. And most importantly, my dad was a man of the traditional things about honor, generosity. He lived by those things, and he always said, do that and be that, and you won't have to worry about every other thing. He would say you don't need bodyguards if you're a good person to your neighbors. Nobody will feel the need to steal from you. So he was not a material person. My mother was a total opposite. He was like, go look for your coins, man. But my dad was like, be kind, be healthy, go eat well, and the rest will take care of itself. So I'm a bit of a balance of, should I say, capitalism and socialism?
I want to highlight that we're speaking about your parents in
Yeah.
past tense, right? Because you lost your parents at a young age. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I lost both of my mom and my dad whiles apart. Like, I'm not what month apart. My mom died in January 20th, and my father died on February 20th. I think my mom died because she was 6, and then I think my dad died because of a heartbreak. Because my father wasn't sick. He just, when my mother died, he would just, carry his seat. Every time I talk about it, I feel so sorry for my father, because I think without my mother, he didn't see the need to live anymore. So he would carry his chair and go sit by the grave and just, stay there the whole day, and he wouldn't eat. And so I think because of that, of the heartbreak, he died. Nowadays, I'm comfortable talking about it. My parents died of HIV, and it was so bizarre because my mother had been a champion for people to get care. But I think at that time, 2004, I don't think the ARVs, the antiretroviral medicine that we use right now, was very friendly, so to speak. They were toxic, they were exhausting, and
Mm.
on top of that, expensive. So I think they resigned. I remember them resigning. I was in Form 1 at that time. They resigned and they came home and, started putting their affairs in order. I think they decided to reach a certain point and they'll stop taking their medication. And my mother, being a nurse, knew what was going to happen after that. Like, they would die.
Mm.
So they constructed a home for us, and it told my elder sister and my elder brother. My parents were like, we have this property here, we have this property there, which wasn't important because after they died, my relatives kind of like took everything, and we found ourselves homeless again. So but it was a very difficult time because I had to drop out of school, and I went to stay with relatives.
Secondary
Yeah,
school.
secondary school, Form 2. And I was in my dream school at that time. And my mom, when I went to Form 1, she paid school fees for the whole year. So I never worried about school
Mm.
fees. And then after that, I think the people they had left the money to look after us, didn't see the need to do that. So I was out of school for, I think, a whole 3 terms, like 2 terms, I wasn't in school, and I was living with relatives, moving from this home to another. And then my headmistress is the one who felt like, she started looking for me. Like, when I was in Form 1, she started looking for me, and called my relatives, because that was the information we used to leave on the admission book. And I had to come back to school and finish my school in a convent. So throughout my teenage, I lived in a convent. And that was fun because there was Catholic convents have huge libraries, and I like books. So that was it was a sad part of my life, but it shaped how I I think about children, how I think about vulnerable people. Because I never used to think human beings could be that bad. Like, I used to think,
Mm.
like, you can't possibly do that to another human being. But during that time when my parents died, that's when I came face to face and experience abuse of all manner, all sorts. um, physical, sexual. I really, I really went through a lot during that time. I don't even know what was. I think, thank God for my art, uh, my love for music, my love for writing. I can, I think it's called fantasia in psychology. Like you can create a world of your own that is very different from what's happening around you. So for me, people always ask me, how can you sit down in a club? Like I could be with my friends, they are making noise, and I could just be there feeling calm, smiling about something because I'm totally zoned out. I am in my own.
Mm.
So during that period of time, were it not for books and music and all my multiple interests, I don't think I would have gone through it. I think I would have lost my mind or something. But it maybe I can just go back a little bit to my childhood. My childhood was also not so nice. I think the worst, the beginning of the worst things I saw about humankind was also during my childhood. My mom, now as an adult, I admire her tenacity, but I don't think I'm gonna put it mildly. I don't think she liked me very much. And my first experiences of just abuse were in her hand. They were she could beat me just because she feels like she wants to beat someone. And I'm very dark skinned, and my mom, if you've seen people from Madagascar, Seychelles, that's how she looked like. And then I came out dark. And then when she gave birth to me, she got this scholarship to go back to school. She was Tanzanian, married to a Kenyan. She went back to school. And I think the influence of, because they came from very different worlds, the influence
Mm.
that my father had on me and my father's side of the family, which was a bit more modest. My mother came from a slightly wealthy family. It When she came back into my life, I think when I was around 7, I was a totally different child, and I wasn't enthusiastic about the things that she was enthusiastic about. So my sister, my elder sister who grew up with my mom throughout was, how do we call that? Like the Southern Bells, let's have tea at 3 o'clock in the morning, those tiny pumps kind of women.
Mhm.
That was
Yeah.
my sister. And I'm like, yeah, let's go ride horses and play in the mud. So my mother was like, what a strange child. Oh my God, what a tomboy. So trying to make me, and she was a perfectionist, a type A type of personality, who wanted nothing but perfection.
So you've kind of shared with us a very kind of harrowing
Mhm.
experience to have at a very young age, and I think was it around 2006 you were diagnosed with clinical depression?
Yeah. So,
Tell us about that.
so obviously, to some level, I feel like in life you have to take the good and the bad. So in my mid 30s now, I people look at me and they tell me, "Oh my God, you can do so many things." I make most of my dresses on a sewing machine. Nowadays, I just don't have time, but I can do that. I can play some instruments. I can design. I can paint. And people tell me, "I wish I could do all those things." And sometimes I really want to tell them, "No, you don't," because how I learned my gift was not like, yeah, let's go sit in a class and do all that. It was through some very harrowing experiences. So my my gifts came from my very bad childhood, and I know to some level even my depression. Like I think 19 when I got my diagnosis, and
Hmm.
I I just finished high school, and I was still living in the convent. I'm just about to get out, and I'd finished my national exams, and I want to get out and go and, start living my life. But at that time, I didn't believe it. I was like, depression, because at that time, like, in high school, when they tell you, oh my God, he was depressed, people, you hear that statement after someone has taken their lives, or these people who lose it and then they kill their entire family, and then the next explanation you hear is they had depression. And I'm like, I would never do that. Like, me kill myself, what the hell no.
So there was a stereotype in kind of media and stuff that you were consuming that kind of helped you think,
Yeah,
think differently about what clinical depression was actually is,
absolutely.
or actually is rather.
Absolutely. I was like, you cannot, I'm not depressed. And at that time, I went home, and I remember my godmother at that time was she was a principal at the school I was in, and a nun, Sister Magdalene. I was like, can you imagine that doctor? I will not even say that doctor because I was so rude to him and I don't want him to remember me. Can you imagine that doctor
Oh,
is a quack? I don't even know which medical school he went to. He said, I'm depressed. What do you mean I'm depressed? Huh? And I at that time, now looking back, I was like, I never used to sleep. And I used to have these moments of extreme, like I don't call it zone out. And this is the struggle I have when I want to describe how people feel like when they're depressed. Some people ask, so do you feel any sort of pain? I used to remember when I would not even be interested in eating, like getting out of bed was just hard, and I would drag myself out, and I'm like, there were days I couldn't do it. Like, I could stay for 3 4 days. There's no urge to eat. And if you live in the convent with the nuns, they're always very kind, generous people. They would bring you cookies and muffins. I don't feel like I remember those kind of episodes. And sometimes I would also not sleep at all, like 24 hours I'm just there, yeah, no sleep at all. And then there are days.
and this is all in your
Yeah, in my teens,
teens.
I started experiencing these things, but I was like, you know what, maybe I'm just stressed. Because the high school I was in at that time in Kenya was one of the best performing high schools. So there was the pressure to perform. And I was just like, it's just the stress, it's just the stress of worrying about it. But now that I look back, those were cases of me starting to manifest, as we call it, MDD, major depressive disorder, of not being able to sleep, to eat, and sometimes not having the urge at all. And actually, I never sought care. By the way, I never took that diagnosis seriously. I went on with my life, and of course, being around religious people, it was always like, you gotta pray, you gotta fast, you gotta do. It's because you're detached from God. You just keep reading the Bible like once. It could be that. So I was like, anytime I would feel like that, I would like, okay, now it's time to go back to God. Anyway, it never used to work,
Mm.
but when it was finally over, like finally it has worked. So that's the time I got my first MDD, depression diagnosis in 2005. I never mentioned it to anyone. 2006, I never mentioned it to anyone because I thought that was ridiculous. And then I got a second diagnosis in 2011 when I was in campus. Now,
5 years later,
5 years
wow.
later, and now the signs are, I'm having when I'm having episodes, they are now severe, and I could be zoned out for months, weeks. I don't even know how I went through campus. My classmates never used to see me in class, and nowadays they joke about it and they say, oh, but you used to have multiple businesses, you are just busy, 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 busy. So, but I'm like, those some of those days I was, yeah, Missy, I was never even able to. I was just out of it. Let me just say that I was just out of it, and then on top of that is that, oh yeah, go on.
I was going to say, it sounds like you were very much dealing with all of it on your own. Was there any kind of support? And you mentioned your grandmother there as well. So were you with her this time? What was the kind of support available to you,
So it's I
or
call her
none?
my godmother, godmother, not grandmother, because I also have to say that that time I was very bitter with life. I as much as my childhood was very bad, I never at one point found myself with no roof over my head, you know. Then suddenly my relatives, they took everything my parents had worked hard for. So I didn't even have a home. I hadn't seen my siblings because when we were chased out from our home in 2004, my siblings each went to look for a place they could stay. My sister went, got married, and that went totally sad. She eventually died in 2014 of HIV again. And I never saw my siblings for years. I never saw them because I didn't know where they were. I mean, we would call each other whenever they would get a phone, but it was such a difficult period of in my life. And then I assumed, you know what, everybody's going through it. And then on top of it, I'm also not the kind of person who is very good at asking for help. I feel like I should just handle my stuff on my own, and that's not a good thing. So I didn't see the need to talk about it. Like I was like, so where do I even start? Okay, now I don't have parents. So if I ask for help, I'm gonna ask for what? Can you be my mom or my dad? So I was just like, well, this is part of life. I'll go through it. I'll find what I'll find out. And then sometimes Amy, you don't have time to like really mourn because there are things to be done. I had to take care of myself. I had to get food. As a girl, you need sanitary towels. I had to work. You know what I mean? I had to work. Immediately after high school, I started working. Even during the long holidays, you know, when we closed school, I had to work. I had to be a house help. I had to be cleaning people's homes to find pocket money to find things I could buy for myself. You know, when schools open, I there was no time for feeling pity for myself. So the thing about depression that was coming, like depression, well, we'll worry about that later. And then in
Mm.
2011, when I actually knew I had to go get help, I didn't have the resources. Like I didn't have the money. I didn't. It was going to cost me a lot. I didn't have the resources to go seek help. So you'd go to the public hospital and they would give you like the basic, because psychotropics, they work in combination. If you're given one drug, you're given another one to counteract the effects of this other one, and then you gotta go for therapy. And seeing psychiatrists are not psychologists, you know, like they have to treat you physically to see whether whatever it is that you're feeling, if you're feeling like you are in low mood, it could be the thyroid. So they have to test that. Is it your thyroid? So I didn't have the money for that. So the care that I got for my depression at that time was really basic to non-existent, so to speak. So I that period of my life also influenced how when I came to the newsroom, mental health became a very I have a lot of respect first of all and compassion for people who go through mental health challenges because first of all, nobody understands. During that period of time, people labeled me weird, spooky. No, people label you names, and you can't sit there and explain to them what depression is because they'll still not get it. They will still not get it. So I decided, you know what, shove it. If you're not in my cycle, that's fine. Even up to date, there's still some classmates of mine who still think, what a weird human being, just because I wasn't able to, when they're calling for parties, I wasn't able to show up. Um, or even if I showed up, I wasn't as enthusiastic because I literally did not have the energy even to smile. Like, I know someone who suffers from depression will understand that. Like, I would have episodes where if you say hello to me, saying it back was it was effort. It was real effort. And sometimes I would push myself, you know what, let me just leave the house and go out and be a normal college going student. And I would show up there and I would still look like I'm out of place. People are like, why would you show up to a party? You're not even socializing. So eventually I just decided I am never going out. And that is still my personality up to date.
And would you attribute or would you attribute other people's reactions to you based, I guess we can attribute other people's reactions to you based on a lack of understanding and also stereotyping and media portrayal of mental health. In a lot of, I mean, in Nigeria, and I know, how those things are portrayed in media, in film, and those kind of things. And the social kind of construct of mental health is not very, very positive, nor is there the help there. You kind of like shunned separately from
Yeah.
society. Um, so and you mentioned there yourself that even when you got the diagnosis, you kind of attributed, well, no, it's certain kind of people that have this, and not me. Um, but also you mentioned there about the newsroom and your empathy for people with mental health, because you are an award-winning global health reporter and editor, right? So let's start with, I want to get to the point to understand how this history you shared with us shaped the kind of journalism that you do and how you do it. But how did you find yourself in the newsroom?
Oh wow. Oh, that's a long journey. First of all, when I wanted to get my career, at first, right from a young age, of course, with my mother, even despite her influences, was always a very, I think from my point of view, it was always a rational. So during my childhood, she was a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde, like the good sides. She really fought for women and girls.
Mm,
My mom, I remember times in a tiny, tiny little frame, like she was a midwife. So she believed, after in the village, she would split her time between the city where we lived and the village, my hometown. And she would see if this woman doesn't deliver in the hospital, they will certainly die. They need an operation or something. And I remember her coming with cops, to raid a home because the woman is almost due and the husband would not allow them to go to the hospital, or because they are fearing they'll be given family planning and be turned into prostitutes. Those days there used to be such funny, funny things. So I remember my mother really she took her work as a midwife very seriously, and her focus was always on the far-flung parts of Nyanza, which is on the south part of country where we hail from as Luos, the Luo tribe. So that and my dad, that thing about social justice was always there within me. So I thought, let me become a lawyer. Then into high school, I'm like, wait a minute, this is the process of how judgment and the law is made. Like, this is such a long time. My God, I don't think I have time for this kind of thing. Then I thought I could be a nurse, like my mom, because even to date, there are people who are named after her because women decided, you know what, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have delivered this child. So even though I'm Masai, I'm naming this child after Luo. So I got that. Then I wanted something that could allow me to deliver on just justice fast. So when I came to the newsroom, I came into the newsroom as a cameraman. And then later I'm like, I don't get to shape the way these stories are told behind the lenses. So I switched. Even though I'm trained in broadcast journalism, I was like, they cut the entire story to like a soundbite. So I moved to print where I could give people nuances and follow stories without people asking me, you've been on this thing for too long. I found my space within print journalism, to where, you could write acres and acres about issues and follow them for months, and people would not, the
mm,
editor would not like, I'm tired of that story. Like in the newspaper, that is what they keep on doing. So that's the need to fight for people like me. I'm not saying I've suffered the worst horrible kind of things, but I know what it feels like to be, first of all, a girl, to be African, to be orphaned, and to come from a family whose name doesn't mean anything. Okay, your name, maybe from my generation it will start meaning something, but if you say okay, or it doesn't make any sense. And that is kind of like somehow the way, the respect you kind of get when you are in this country, the country that I live in. I don't know about other countries, but I suppose it's not different in Africa. Like if you are just people see young girls and they see orphans as things to be exploited. Like looking back at my childhood, I remember going for bursary forms from the government to get school fees. And I remember fighting with the counselor, like he was actually going for rape. And I would leave that place and I would go and tell someone, you know what, that guy almost did this to me. Look at all these scratches on my neck. And people would just say, you're creating stories. You are creating stories. So that something became normal for me. I see it. I see the way people use domestic house help because I was a domestic house help. Even right now, I see it. When you don't have money and you're vulnerable, I mean, you don't have money and worse, you're uneducated, you don't have parents, it puts you at a very vulnerable position, and there is not enough that you can tell women, oh, don't travel at night, or don't do this. There's nothing that you can protect yourself under such conditions because you will always be a target. And when an injustice has been done for you, when you go to the authorities and seek for help, nobody will believe you, nobody will see you. Even if you die, nobody will see it as something worth investigating because as far as they're concerned, you're insignificant. So that is what really pushed me to come to journalism, and that is who I am. I don't separate my work with the values that I live in. I believe we shouldn't give everybody a yacht. Like nobody should be Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. But if we are in a river, some people can have a yacht, but some people can have a boat. No one needs to drown.
Yeah.
Nobody needs to be. You can eat your five-course meal, but the other person, even if it's just a basic meal of rice and beans, people should eat. So for me, that's how I see life. That's how I see it, and that's how I approach my work with journalism. I used to pursue and I took global health because that's where I saw growing up, that's where I saw the biggest injustices. Like my mom, her salary, because she wasn't so needy, I remember her, um, you know, going to this hospital, borrowing vaccines here. Can I borrow? And then she would go to some places, like I remember some places it's called Guasi.
Mm.
The road is bad, but that time polio was such a huge thing in Kenya. And I remember my mother going there and taking vaccines to people they've never been vaccinated basically. So even that just thing, like a vial of vaccines, it didn't matter. Like it didn't matter that there are children over there and they needed those vaccines. So that is how I lead my life, and I run a few businesses right now, and that is how the people who work for me, that is how I treat them because I saw between, let me say basically from my childhood to say my mid 20s, I saw the worst of humankind and how when you are, as I said, a woman, African, if the other factors that make you even more vulnerable, often it's worse even if you're disabled. If you have disability there, like if you're a person living with disability, it's even worse because you can see
Mm.
people who take advantage of the psychotic people on the streets. Like they're human beings, but you can see people rape them and they get them pregnant.
Yeah.
And when they
Yeah.
go to the police, people will even laugh. Like, is this a story you're cooking up? Even if they have injuries, people will laugh at them. So that's what brought me to the newsroom, and it shapes my personal experiences. And I cannot say I was so vulnerable because I am educated right now. And before my parents died, let me say, even though I lived in a rural area, I never saw sewages. I never lived in a dirty place. I never.
Mm.
So I knew a bit of, let me say, I was a little privileged. Despite the abuse, it happened within privilege. So I can tell, I can see how some people would be denied. So I considered myself not so much disadvantage as I looked at people like if they were in my situation, but they don't have an education, they don't know whether this is, some of those things you may see happen to people and they don't even know it's wrong. Like house help, I've
Mm.
covered cases of house helps who the owner of the house rapes them again and again and again, and they don't even know it's wrong. Yeah, it's been normalized. Yeah, so that's how I came to the newsroom.
So you're in a position where you have lived experiences that kind of guide your values and your ethos in your journalism to ensure that the issue of representation of people with mental health and other health related, and you particularly have a love for science journalism, right? So in that kind of quality and adequate reporting of those issues, but then at the same time, you yourself having mental health issues to contend with whilst reporting on other people's vulnerabilities and issues. So how did you navigate that? And I want to point out that you wrote a post on LinkedIn in October 2022.
Yeah.
And I remember as soon as I saw that post, obviously I knew part of the story,
Mhm.
but as soon as I saw that post, I texted you, WhatsApp you, didn't I? I was like, I saw your post on LinkedIn, And in that post, you said, and I'll quote you now, you said, I was selective of who I told I was unwell because telling an ignorant person you have clinical depression can really make your life hard at work.
Yep.
And then in relation to kind of, the wider impact on your actual practice, you said you could be passed over for promotions or given certain assignments because of a belief you'll not handle the tough ones.
Yep.
They could genuinely mean well,
Yep.
but journalism is a cutthroat field that also exposes people to situations that could exacerbate mental illness.
Yep.
So tell us how you've navigated both sides of the coin.
Oh yeah. So I did keep my diagnosis very, very under the wraps, and in the newsroom when I finally came out, I actually talked about, oh, I am depressed in 2019, just at the beginning of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
After, you know, I left the newsroom for a little bit. I came to the LSE. I came to London to do my post grad, but also during that time was, I consider that period of time to distance myself geographically from Kenya, and family can be a lot. I give myself just a distance and go to other places and then come back to my life, check in back to my life again. So when I came back, I was like, you know what? I've built my career at a certain point where I have no money to show for it, but I'm confident in Kenya. If you say Verah Okeyo in my craft, people, I have earned my stripes. I have done the job and I've gotten a place where people can question many things about me, but not my delivery of my work.
Mm.
I reached a place where I knew, well, this is me. And despite everything else, all the awards and all the grants and all the innovations I've tried to bring into my work, because I'm always experimenting. As I started and I said, I'm a curious child. I'm always experimenting. So I was confident that if I talked about my depression at this time, nobody would use it against me at all.
Mm.
At that time, I just started getting grants for my work because I knew my employer at that time was never going to pay me the money that I felt I was worth. Um, so I was like, well, if you fire me, I still have that money. I can just go and do. Well, they were never going to fire me because actually, when I got really sick that year, it's actually Nation. They're the ones who funded my treatment, and I stayed in a psychiatric institution for like a month and a half. So I knew they were not going to fire me, but that was the top leadership. But in between here, the middle level management, I knew if I'd shared about my depression earlier before the newsroom, you have done plenty of AWIM, I mean Africa Women in Media. We have done a lot of studies and a lot of writing about how it is harsh in the newsroom, and I think that is should I say that's why AWIM is in existence anyway, to make
Yeah.
sure that women are making the most out of it. So I knew, on top of being a woman and in that very masculine field, and then you say, wow, I have depression. Normally, when you say, oh my God, I'm going on maternity leave, people are like, man, you took this thing about procreating and feeling the world too seriously. Such kind of comments.
Mm,
And it's not just comments. There are comments, and then it will also affect the kind of serious assignments that you are given because you're pregnant, or you're moody. We cannot run away from such things. So I knew if I had shared that story before, it was going to derail my career a lot. So I decided to keep my my battles under wraps. I don't think I ever even told anyone at my workplace that I was depressed, ever,
mm,
until when I came back and I knew I don't care right now. Like, I'm at a place where I
mm,
could do that. So how I navigated that is, first of all, um, between after graduation, I think I graduated in 2012. I was 25. I had given myself like I was 24. I was given myself like a period of time where I want to build my career. I don't care about money. Uh, I thought Nation, that company at that time, was the best place to build that, and I gave my work my all, a hundred
mm,
percent of my work. And I knew, because I would have those episodes on the days that I was okay, I would give my work everything, deliver and have results and success, so that when I feel like now it's time to take a break, nobody would say, but you are such a lazy person. So the days that I needed I was okay, I did all my work. So first of all is that working when maximizing on your up moments. I did that. And number two, I took my care seriously, but that is not just the medicine that I was being given at the hospital. It's also mental health. I love martial arts.
mm,
I love riding horses. So I took time when it was Saturdays. I normally don't do anything since time immemorial. I don't watch TV. I don't eat. I don't. It's a day for. It's time to take care of my body. So I
mm,
go to the stables. I ride the horses. I go to the dojo with the trainer. We do the martial arts, physical exercises. Unless it is something like really really urgent, Saturdays have always been sacred. So I create time for that, because I know if I don't exercise, if I don't run, if I don't engage my creative self, like I gotta go to the studio once in a while, try to remind myself how to play the instruments and be around music. I took that seriously, and one of those things is, and then number two is just mental resilience. Like, this is your battle, this is your journey. Nobody has to understand it. I know it's very painful when people who suffer from mental health, they don't get the support from the closest people. I made peace with that a very long time ago, and I said nobody has to understand this, and I don't have to explain it. And that's why I was saying I had to be very selective. Like, and you could know that if you're someone who's suffering from mental health, you can know that when you interact with people. When you're telling them, I don't feel like going out today. Like, I've been going out the 10 times, the 9 times. This one time, I don't feel like I go out. People who understand that will be like, that's fine. They'll not make jest out of it. They'll not label you names. In my circles, there are people who were very close, but they don't know I've had depression until I came out to share it on. I was on TV, and um, now I'm having this podcast with you, and I posted
mm,
a few things on social media because I wanted people to be okay with seeking help. There
mm,
are people who still call me, oh, the 90-year-old, 30-year-old. Well, I'm an old soul, but they label that because I never go out. Sometimes I don't have the energy to do that. So I feel like, you know what, I don't have to correct that. If you feel I'm a 90-year-old, 30-year-old, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, it's not a
mm,
crime. It's not a crime. I can be that, and it's good. So it's people who are mentally ill, need to know that. And then the last thing, when you're mentally ill, is what you suffer from is sometimes is a lack of structure. So I had to put structure in my life that were even like a robot. Even if I wasn't okay, I could do those things. Like I wake up at a specific time, I sleep at a specific time, I eat at a specific time, so that one day I know it will come to a point where I am not able to think about these things. I will do these things on autopilot. So
Mm.
right now, at this time at 36, I could be really depressed, but I will wake up at 5:30 a.m. as usual. By then, I'm not a morning person, but I'll put it in there. I'll wake up, I'll go to the dojo, and then I'll come back, and I could go to the nitty granular. Those things happen because every day, that's how I live my life. So if you're mentally ill like me, you need to structure your life that way so that
Mm.
you're able to do the most basic things. You're able to even bathe, because there are certain episodes when you have severe major depressive disorder, you'll not even be able to bathe. So even that, I had to put structures on those ones so that it if it got to that point, I will not be found in the house stinking. You know what I mean? So
Mm.
that structure is very important, and it varies from one person to another.
To another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you find what works for you and then put it.
So, um, reflecting on your experiences and all that we talked about today, what advice would you give media organizations in terms of better supporting the staff who have their own mental health issues, but also in terms of reporting and some of the issues around
Yep.
diversity, equity, and inclusion that you've talked about? So, on both sides of the
Mm,
coin, the journalists, men and women who have mental health issues and,
yep.
compounding that with the pressures of being a journalist, the support for them, but then also in terms of the content and reps, because in your own experience, you've got the lived experience, but you also have that
Mm.
experience of the influence and the impact of media representation on it. So, what advice would you give to organizations?
Wow, that's a good question. First of all, I like to say, like, people cannot be compassionate if they have never experienced that. You will always reflect. Journalists cannot be nice. Nice is not the word. They cannot be empathetic if the
Mm.
environment they work in has no empathy. So let's start from that point. Like when I never knew there was a problem with how journalisms until I stepped out of it and then watched it from outside. And I can still see some of my colleagues who are still, when I tell them those things, well, maybe they listen to me because, I came into the newsroom as an intern and I rose up the ladder. So they can't say, oh my God, you don't understand. They know I understand. But there's still a lot of defensiveness whenever you bring those things to reporters. So newsroom should just know that if you take care of reporters, and this has got nothing to do with money, it's just if you reflect that kind of empathy on them, they'll be able to do that with people. You've seen some headlines, especially where we come from, MEC. You've seen some headlines, the way people report on gender-based violence, especially if the woman is perceived to be like, so this wasn't even your husband. Okay, what were you doing out at night? um you have to be a perfect victim somehow. By a perfect victim, for us to feel outrage, you have to have been pure, you have to have been chaste, you have to be a church going person. If you fall out of that box, the media will have no empathy and sympathy for your problems. Like, you'll be attacked, troll. Let's not even talk about the extreme things like rape. I feel like there's some women, I think they lead lives that I wouldn't lead those lives. I'm like, wow. But that does not mean that it's okay for such a woman to be trolled online and be dehumanized just because she has multiple sexual partners and decides to put her body out, dress skimpily, quote unquote, the crime of being living out of the boxes of what the society expects does not allow people to do the things they do to you, doesn't allow you to be sexually assaulted, to be trolled or attacked online, or even be killed. You've seen the people being killed for their choices. So the reason why sometimes journalists cannot write of those things with empathy is because right in the newsrooms, they don't experience that. They get attacked when they get pregnant, when they get sick, when they are poor, particularly for men. They cannot say, today I'm feeling downcast. I went to report about um, a house that collapsed and I saw small children, they are dead. I feel sad about that because I also have small kids. Nobody can allow male reporters to feel like that. They'll be treated like, I was about to say some bad word, but don't be a child. Don't be a child. You know the word people say when they talk to men about that.
Yeah.
So
This idea of masculinity and
yeah, like they have to be
yeah.
tough and strong, and then just generally the environment in the newsroom. It's like military deadlines, and when you don't meet those military deadlines, the feedback is not given to you in kind ways. I remember I was given a memo several times for just standing up to a bully in the newsroom. Like they could clearly see that this someone is coming after me for no reason,
Mm.
but I was still given those memos, you know. So how do you expect journalists to be fair in reporting when the way they are treated is as subhuman? So what I'll tell media bosses, because they're also in that mix, as they were climbing up, that's how they were treated, and they feel that is the culture. It's like, what is that thing that college students go through before they
Like some kind of induction or
some induction, like
yeah.
sorority thing, like you have
Yeah.
to go through this thing. So it's I'll tell media bosses to first of all create departments like proper HR, my friend, not those HR of hiring and firing, human resources. And after I came out from LSE, I took so many diploma courses to just try to understand, if I ever become a manager, which I am now, if I ever become a leader, I'm not going to do that. And I've come to know one of the things I studied was I went and did my postgrad in education so that I could teach. I did a postgrad diploma in HR so that, and I've come to understand human resources is not just, are you delivering so that you can get fired? It's you have to develop people. And I think newsrooms need to invest in that their biggest resource is the reporters. And
Mm.
then put in structures like a standard operating procedure. I'm grateful when I went to my boss and I told him, you know what, you can even pay me on half a salary, but I cannot continue. The HR at that time, Jane Moirori, and my boss, like boss of my boss, Pamela Sitoni, was like, are you kidding? No, you need help. You need help. You need to go to the hospital. You'll get your full salary. So at that time, I didn't even know that Nation had a policy for what happens
Mm.
when there's a mental health issue. And that's, I know multiple newsrooms in the country that do not have that. And in the continent, they don't have. What happens when a staff loses it because of
Life
the
issues.
life issues. And I had clinical depression, which means whether I came to the newsroom or not, it had to be there. But some people did develop mental health issues. Awim carried the story of Eunice Omolo.
Mm.
Eunice, when she came to the newsroom, she wasn't depressed, but covering COVID, seeing people dying, people crying on the phone about their husband. I remember a colleague of mine, we had this really, really bad terror attack where people just walked into a university campus and shot 200 children, And she was there taking pictures of those bodies, talking to mothers as they cry of their children. This was my only child, those things you miss, they can weigh you
Yeah,
down.
absolutely.
They can mess you up. So newsrooms needs to understand the world is, as a matter of fact, is becoming worse and more hostile. But even as we exist in it as journalists, there needs to be a time you're like, yo, check out. This is you to check out of covering traumatic stories. Go for therapy. It needs to be mandatory for you. You cover one bad accident where there are 3 casualties, 4 casualties, you go for therapy. Because for me, when I notice there's a huge problems, like apart from a depression, is just like it's like fatalism. Like someone tells you, oh, there's an accident. You're like, how many people died? 3. Okay, that's not a story.
Mm,
You've normalized
yeah,
tragedies as
yeah.
though for it to matter, it has to be a huge body count, not knowing one life, that's a human being, that's a mother, that's or a father, that's a human being.
So some of the things you said there also, I suppose, is advice for journalists themselves, because you talked about how you didn't even know there was a policy in your organization. So, what advice would you give to journalists themselves who are living with mental health issues, either because of, mental health issues that they have, irrespective of their career, or those that develop as a consequence of the kind of stories they report?
Number one, first of all, I say know when it's time to check out. Like some people are not built. What advice I'll give to journalists is that know when it's time to check out. Like not checking out temporarily. You can check out temporarily, but even leave the industry. Like leave it. I think there's nothing more precious than your sanity. It looks like a woke thing to say these days that your mental health is priority, but it truly is a priority. So know when it's time to check out. But for those who are die-hard journalists, like I know at a certain point in my career, even though now I'm not in the newsroom, I'll go back. I was born to be in the newsroom. I'll go back there at some point. Even in that, it's good to know when to check out, like once in a while. When do you give yourself a break from that, being on that treadmill, to connect to your humanity, to connect to your sanity, to connect, just to connect. Um, it's important to know when to have temporary breaks of when to do. So that's number one, know when to check out. And then number two, I think journalism is one of those feel like, so it's good to have support systems of people who can, become a second adult in your life. When you're 95% of the time you're a Superman, but 5% you're Clark Kent. So when you become Clark Kent, you need to have people who remind you that you're still vulnerable to kryptonite. That 5% time can finish you. That's when people take their lives. That's when people get into abusing drugs and some very bad coping mechanisms.
So, Vera, what next for you?
What next? So I've been working on this project still on my passion for diversity. What I'll keep on doing still, everything is connected. That's what I always say. Everything I've learned in my life, good or bad, in good circumstances or in bad circumstances, in life you have to take both the good and the bad and decide what you're going to do with it. So at 36, I think there is so much more that I can give the world than complaining about, oh my God, what a terrible childhood I had, or how difficult life is, or how the world is messed up. So I want to be part of people, even if I don't give a solution, people who attempt to get people to think about solutions. At this point in my life, I'm going to take every lesson I learned and put it into my work. I don't think those are a priority when I look at things. I want to take projects that I am passionate about. So my friend, one of the people who saw me go through, what I was going through, but at the same time, still going to do my ethnographic journalism and whatnot. She gave me some money, a lot, almost $6,000 to set up this digital news platform. I know there's a lot of those, but I will not be doing things by myself. I'll be like partnering with newsrooms to produce content, to do journalism that is still boots on the ground kind of journalism, but still to give people agency.
Mm,
Because for the whole pandemic, I left the newsroom in the middle of the pandemic after covering the pandemic for a whole year and a half. And when I came out, I was still participating as a journalist, but now in communication. But I thought, wow, that generation of ours who left the newsroom were like three ladies who used to be very close. Every time we come to WhatsApp, we're like, wow, they really did that woman bad. Look at her, she's been raped, but look at the
mm,
headline. So I decided, you know what? Why don't I, instead of whining and saying, coming to put hashtag someone tell on Twitter, why don't I work with people to tell them that when you tell stories differently, it's even good business for you and you get to do good by people. So I'm working on that project. I'm very passionate about it. And I have decided I'm going to name it De Frontera. De Frontera. I love the Spanish language. I think in my one of my multiple lives, I must have been a Spaniard. I don't know. Business of mine is called the Frontera. It's Dignidad Rurales, dignity in rural areas, the nonprofit I run with my godmother for being toilets and basic social amenities in rural areas. So I decided to call it the Frontera, which is on the frontiers of journalism, trying to do things differently. But at the core of that entire thing is, by the end of the day, we need to get back to the basics of life, which is people are not commodities. People are human beings, and we need to not get lost in the capitalism. Everything that I've learned, I am going to give it back to the world in a good way. If I learned anger and abuse, I'm going to give it back in the world by telling people this is how to be compassionate and how to love people. That's
mm.
the next thing for me.
Thank you so much, Vera. I mean, where do I even start with kind of all that I've gained from this speaking with you? And I hope that for you, it's been a positive experience. I hope that you've gained a lot from kind of sharing your story. I really hope that you've benefited from sharing that story as much as I and other people listening will have.
And thank you for giving me this platform to talk about it, and also just being yourself. Just being much more than an academic. You're someone people can look up to. If nobody has ever given you that feedback, just thank you for being you. And your students must be lucky to have you as their teacher.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vera.
All right.
Vera's story is beyond inspiring because in where she is now in her life, in where she is now in her career journey, in her personal life, you can see how she has embodied and owned and used her experience to empower herself and also to empower others. For me, the bravery behind Vera sharing her story, because I understand the culture that she speaks of, both in terms of the country, the cultures in our certain African communities, but also in the industry as well. But I also hope for everybody listening who are experienced and who have experienced some of the things that Vera has said, firstly, that you're not alone, but secondly, that there is a way in which all of it, all of your experiences can have meaning and does have meaning. And it is okay that sometimes you're not okay. If you'd like to join me on an episode of this podcast, please contact me at yemisi@africanwomeninmedia.com. You can also visit our main website at africanwomeninmedia.com to find out more about our work. In the show notes, there's a list of organizations and helplines to support you if you have experienced any of the topics we have discussed today. And don't forget, join the conversation using hashtag #HerMediaDiary.
Her Media Diary is a product of African Women in Media, an NGO advocating for gender equality in the industry. And this episode was hosted by Dr. Yemisi Akimbobola and produced by Blessing Udeobasi as part of a 5-episode series on mental health in the media. All music featured in this podcast is by Nana Kwabena. Thanks for listening and join us again next time.